Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this special webinar. I hope everyone's recovered from various illnesses from last week. We're very happy to be able to host this event. With the COVID crisis dominating our lives, as well as the news cycle here at JPC, we haven't forgotten a local kind of plague. It seems as though we hear almost daily about a shooting or crime-related death in the Arab sector on a weekly basis, often involving innocent bystanders caught in the crossfires. The death of a little boy shot earlier this month really shook the nation. Today we've gathered some of the leading voices in the field to hear if there is reason to believe that this year might be a better one, as activists from the community and authorities work to improve things on the ground. We have with us Dr. Dalia Fadila, co-CEO of Atidna, former Knesset member and senior official at the Israeli police, Major General in Reserves David Tsur, Samah Salaime, founder and manager of Na'am, as well as advocate Amal Oraby Hussein, former coordinator of the project to combat violence in Arab society at Sikkuy-Aufoq. Before we begin with our Q&A, I'll introduce each panelist who will have the opportunity to address the audience. So with that, we will begin with Dr. Dalia Fadila, who is, as I said, the co-CEO of Atidna, an NGO that seeks to build pragmatic, courageous, and representative Arab leadership. She's the director of the Al-Qasemi College for Science and Engineering at Baka, al-Garbiyyeh, where she heads its School of Practical Engineers, and is a lecturer at Reichman University. She serves as a public representative on the governmental civil service committee and has led international seminars on issues of gender, culture, identity, and education. Dr. Fadila, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, but I have to be a bit of correcting of what you said. First of all, I have already quit my job at Al-Qasemi. I resigned a few years ago, and I resigned for a reason. I arrived at the conclusion that the solutions to the problems of the Arab community do not start from the top level of teacher education. And because of the flooding of teachers in the Arab community not solving the problems. So I quit and I started the Q Schools. I'm the founder of the Q Schools, which is an alternative system of education in the Arab community. Since in recent years, we started bilingual and trilingual English, Arabic, Hebrew preschools, daycares. We started a consultation program institute where we accompany and mentor schools in East Jerusalem, Jewish schools, Arab schools, and we're also now building our trilingual leadership high school in Tira in the Triangle area. And of course, also a co-CEO of Atidna. So this is my present introduction, correctly speaking. So to start with the problem of violence in the Arab community or crime in the Arab community, as you know, this monster is two-headed. It has its internal reasons inside the community and it has external reasons that go back into what we keep calling as the relationship of a state towards the Arab minority inside Israel and vice versa. So when we speak about the internal factors that are dominating what's going on in the Arab community, these are very, very much various. And I have to say that COVID-19 has really intensified the internal gaps in education, the internal gaps in the economic status, the internal shattering of a middle class in the Arab community, and making socioeconomic challenges even more severe than they have been before COVID-19. And when we speak of that, statistically, this observation is supported by the statistics. The employment among Arab women in recent 2 years has dropped from being in a promising way, from almost 30 to 40% dropped back to less than 20%. And although Arab women are more educated than Arab men, and 60% of Arab academics are women. And this comes to the other issue that also employment among Arab men has dropped from 70% into 40%. This means like 60% of Arab men are unemployed, and dealing with more educated women, this also brings into, highlights the gaps in between Arab women and Arab men inside the family, and can explain many of the domestic violence there. The fact that women are unemployed, it might also indicate some of the reasons why there is so much violence against women in the Arab community. Now, when it comes to unemployment, it also explains that many of the crime stories go around money, and the transfer of money and cash money from one side to another. And it's not only because of unemployment, there is something changing in the mentality of young Arab men, where hard work and a pursuit of a career and a pursuit of higher education, although it's increasing, like more and more, where the number of educated Arabs or Arabs seeking higher education inside Israel is rising from 5 or 6 years ago, 12% into 17%, and we're almost there to be represented in academia as we are represented in the larger population in Israel. However, all of these factors coming inside will not lead automatically to crime or to violence unless there is something in the ethos, unless there is something in the way ideology is being outlaid. And what do I mean by that? Very much, and I keep repeating that, I blame Arab leaders in our current situation, among others. Now, why do I blame them? When you present the state as your enemy, and you show how dangerous it is to be integrated, how Israelization is against what the Arab community seeks as its own public good. What is left is an enclave. What is left is a cave, actually, in the Arab community. And once you portray that outside Israeli society as your enemy, and you implement suspicion and fear and hatred toward the other, the majority, and toward the state, what happens is that many of the young Arabs want to go back into the community. And honestly speaking, how much room do we have for young men with their aspirations and energies inside the community? How many employment opportunities do we have? What is the highest position that you can reach in an Arab community? Being a mayor, being in the municipality, being a headmaster of a school, being this or that. How many opportunities are there? How many businesses are inside the Arab community? How many places that can have more than a family business and open it to other people to join as co-workers inside? And the restrictions in this space surrounded by suspicion, a suspicion created by leaders, in a way leads to pressure, and pressure leads to explosion. And this is my interpretation. Like, any socioeconomic factor might lead to what is going on in any other community, but when it's intensified by leaders who say the state is our enemy and Israeli society is not a place safe enough for us to walk around, so you go back to your room, and your room has to offer everything for you. Now, instead of investing in the opportunities inside this room with your restricted means and with your feeling of a victim, what happens is a generation of an internal cancer that feeds the crime and feeds the violence inside the Arab community. That's the internal story in my perspective. The other story is the relationship of the state to what happens in the Arab community inside Israel. And it's absolutely, I say it's Pygmalionic in so many ways. It's like, it's a policy led by blindness and some wishful thinking that come a fulfillment of some Pygmalionic theory. What do I mean by that? Yet with all the investment and the governmental decisions and the billions of shekels are invested in the Arab community, still the the policy of the State of Israel towards the Arab community is a policy of a backyard of someone's home. And the investment does not go from putting money in upper places like high-tech, or putting money in places like employment, or investing in those young people who have the right families, right background, who go to the Technion and to the big universities and who have it all. This is not the right investment. If you want to invest in the Arab community as part of the larger Israeli society, you have to invest in the education in the schools, in the schools, in the whole system, and think of a vision. What is it to be an Arab citizen of Israel? What it means to have your own language, you have your own values, to have your own culture, and at the same time participate in some civic definition, being the citizen of the State of Israel. In the Ministry of Education, or in and around the government, no one is really taking enough effort to really define what it means both to have this hyphenated identity where you have a respected being as an Arab, as a language, as a culture, as a community, as values, and at the same time participate in civic life as an Israeli with equal rights. Now, this is the equation. In the lack of such equation, in the lack of such vision, we see investment as check here, another check there, a lot of money going in my perspective, sometimes the wrong channels. However, it's not a systematic investment in the integration of the whole Arab community in the State of Israel as participants, as equal participants, equal citizens. Now, sometimes I look at what's going on, and it is as if, and especially since May, there is some willing to justify the stereotype of the violent Arab. In a way, everything that happens is immediately associated with the image of the violent Arab, or the criminal, or the one who kills his relative or wife or friend or whatever, rather than really treat the roots of the problem. And I think those two internal local politics, internal restrictive life, and I say that coming on with a policy that is not systematic, that is not comprehensive, that still with everything that it does, it intensifies the victimhood mentality and the backyard mentality rather than a whole systematic approach into integration. Those two coming together are very explosive. They might not be connected directly to every case. And in every case, you can find a very, very specific reason. However, when a community is walking around such unbelievable threat, you have to ask yourself, whose responsibility is it? And everyone who knows me knows, first of all, I say it is our responsibility. There is something that we are not doing as a community. And I'm afraid to say that in our mentality, sometimes we have this waiting until mentality, which is very, very dangerous. And we're paying a lot of price in our souls because of that mentality of blaming the other and waiting until. We need to be more productive, not only consuming, but also productive. And when I say moving from consumption to production, and I say a lot of the money goes around having a lot of money, a lot of the crime goes around having easy money and not working enough, which is that mentality of a consuming minority rather than a producing minority, a passive minority than a participating minority. And that dynamic have to change.
Very clear, Dr. Fadila. I'm gonna stop you there just because we want to make sure that everybody has time. Yeah. Sure.
I'm gonna just finish my sentence, and I say, on the other hand, I would expect, besides the big investment in money, another investment in the vision of an Israeli society that is comprehensive, that has room for everyone, and room for the diversity, and room for people who might want to define themselves otherwise, but yet want to keep continuing being the citizens of Israel, integrated in all of its public and governmental and civic spheres.
All right, very clear. Thank you so much. And my apologies for the incorrect introduction. Next, we'd like to hear from Major General in Reserves, David Tsur, who's held key positions in the Israel police, including head of the Tel Aviv District, deputy head of operations, and commander of the border police during the Second Intifada. He also served as chief of staff to Minister of Public Security and was a member of Knesset for Atidna party. Mr. Tsur, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. I must say that I was very impressed and pleased from hearing Dalia, Dr. Dalia, Fadila notes, which I almost agree in all of them. She analyzed, I think, deep things which are happening in the society, from the social part and from other political part, lack of governmental activities, which in general I agree with most of the things. I want to maybe put another angle from my position, in my perspective, as the chief of police in Tel Aviv District, and also I serve this sub-district commander in the Shfela area, which is in Ramle Lud and the areas of the center, and not only Jaffa. I must say that I have quite a kilometrage and experience with the Arab society and the positive points and the negative, which it's very complicated to try to analyze only from the social points, which I need maybe to put on the table a few things. If we're looking about not only about the symptoms, but to try to analyze what are the deep reasons for this escalation in the violence in the society, especially in the Arab society. So I think we can measure some things which are happening in the general society, and not only in the Arab society, but especially maybe it reflected more tragically and violent in the Arab society. One of the main issues is the lack of authorization. I mean, we're looking at quite the same movement which is happening in the Jewish Israeli society and the Arab society, on the fact that neither parents, teachers, politicians, of course, or other leaders are not, as maybe we thought years ago, which we can influence the society by trying to influence one or two people so they can influence a lot of them. So it can be a kind of a tool which we can use as a tool we used to do it. I must say, when I was in the sub-district commander, and I had a huge amount of criminal activities, but not only criminal, it's coming from some other background, which is not criminals who are involved in this violence, like normative people, but in blood revenge or gangs, when gangs start from each other, and it's because of the tribal system, so we can find that a lot of innocent people are part of this violence. Even they didn't choose to be there, but they are part of the family, so they become either victims or even involved. So sometimes we had 2 or 3 leaders which we can talk with, and they had the influence down to the deep of those criminals, even the criminals. Today it's almost you don't know who to talk with. The young people are definitely are not getting any orders or authorization orders. Another deep issue which is happening, and maybe it's very dominate on the south with the Bedouins, which is something to talk about it, that in the other end, I think Dalia mentioned it in a way bravely, we have to see that we are analyzing truly and not only, because we're hearing a lot of politicians who taking advantage about this situation in a way that we find there is a mix between pure criminals and violence, which is coming from those crime they committing, to a nationality activities. Some of the things which are happening mainly on the roads and with the Bedouins, etc. Immediately, if we take into reflecting it to what's happening on the territories, so it's something which we by ourselves, and also we, when I'm saying we, I'm claiming to also to the media, very quickly we put a tag of almost terror. So if we're talking about terror, so it's almost like we say the keyword for tagging activities like in terror. So this is something which, and it's a circle which feed themselves. So the violence, in a way, we draw into that circle of violence young people, which are, if we're putting in this formula, the unemployment, which you mentioned before, and a lot of feelings that there are a lack of sharing sources. So this discrimination, etc. So it become a kind of a very dangerous cocktail. Maybe later I can elaborate to what I think can be done on the short term, the midterm, and the long term, which those things have to be, I think, more accurate if we want to change some things. And it can be changed. It's not kind of a nature which falling on our heads.
That's good to hear, obviously, that we have an optimistic view here. So, Mr. Tsur, thank you very much for your opening remarks. We're going to move on to Advocate Amal Oraby Hussein, who, as I said, was the coordinator for the project to combat violence in Arab society at the Haifa-based Sikkuy-Aufoq NGO, who was also previously the organization's Equality Policy Department advocate and urban planner. As a lawyer, he specializes in administrative planning and building law. So Mr. Oraby Hussein, please go ahead.
Hi, first of all, I would thank you for organizing this webinar. And I will start why it's so important for me to be here and to talk for the English media. Because I think that the Jewish media or the Hebrew media in the last maybe 10 years, outlets often reduce the violence issue to the need of the opening police station in the Arab town. And the public discourse is often criticized by the victim blaming that holds that the Arab society responsible for solving this issue. The increased efforts of many Arab social and political activists who published posts in social media and appear in interviews contribute to change this discourse. And we are seeing now that many of the media programs have changed the framing of their converge of the violence in Arab society, and included a discussion of the underlying issues as a factor contributing this phenomenon. This is a good step, but it's not enough, because the discussion of this problem is still defined it as a security issue rather than a social issue. And this definition will ultimately influence the discussion determining which tools should be used to address this issue. In order to answer the question, the questions about the victims, the violence in the Arab society, I think that we have to answer two questions. The one question is, where do guns come from? and how they reach the Arab society. And another question is, what is the reasons it drive the Arab youth to engage in violence? About the first question, many sources shows that the guns in the Arab society come through the IDF, Israeli military service, and the Israelis' constructive governments have systematically neglected this issue and never have never addressed it effectively. This enabled the rise of the organized crime in the Arab towns and contributed to the increase in violence. About the second question, there is several underlying factors that drive Arab youth to engage in violence and the organized crime, all of which are the result of the systematic policies of the Israeli governments that neglected the Arab society and towns, poor infrastructure, lack of solution of chronic planning and housing problem, and limited employment opportunities. And the spans of equality of informal education framework are all deep stated factors that contribute the increase of violence and crime in the Arab towns. This is a critical importance, especially among the Arab youth, that 40% of whom are not in any employment or educational framework. Therefore, and unfortunately, joining the crime organization because joining the crime organization become a viable option for them. One of the solutions being discussed today in enforcing more severe punishment of guns bashes. In my view, this merely solves the symptoms of the problem and does not serve as the serious attempt of understanding the source of the problem and address it. It will also lead to over-representation of the Arab citizens in Israel in prison, as is the case in the Black community in the USA. A serious attempt to manage the violence in the Arab society should seek to understand the underlying resources of this widespread phenomenon and to try to address it and its implications on both on the short and the long terms. Another problem that I see that the discourse about this issue, it's limited within the Arab society, when in fact it's also an issue in the Jewish society. It's go back to the 218 after a small-scale unrest erupted during the time in Jerusalem city, and when Gilad Erdan, who then served as the Internal Security Affairs Minister, encouraged the Jewish citizens to obtain personal weapons such as guns, justifying this by claiming that they need to protect themselves by themselves from the Palestinians. Since then, a sort of an arms race started in Israeli Jewish society, where individuals start obtaining guns license and buying guns by law. I think this is a very dangerous, mostly because the speech of self-protection is a Jewish-oriented, while Arab are excluded from it. Secondly, because the Palestinians are the large and the specific group of people that these guns will be obtaining towards. Lastly, it's also dangerous for the Jewish community itself, because these guns can be used in violence between Jews and can lead to increase the violence against women. What I like to say that in order to solve this problem, we should speak about the deep factors that affect the phenomenon and not to try to deal with the symptoms of the phenomenon. And we also have to speak and to deal with this phenomenon and define it as a social issue and not a security issue.
So I think the first question that we were going to open up, and I think it'll be best for it, rather than directing the questions at specific speakers, if we get questions that are directed at everyone, whoever's interested in answering them will just raise their hand and speak. The first question is about the rise in the numbers, whether we have any indication as to why it seems as though the casualty number is going up. Is it just more are being reported, or is there actually an increase, and why this is happening? If any of our panelists have the answer or believe they have an answer.
Now, can I?
Yes,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
I think everything that is going on is actually very oxymoronic. It's like a contradiction of terminologies or realities. Now with the new investment and the decisions of 923 and other decisions investing more and more in the Arab community and gap year and at-risk students, like this looks very promising. However, the statistics on the other hand are growing in terms of crime, and the indications are definitely not positive in that direction. Negatively positive, unfortunately, when we speak in the terminology of COVID-19. And the thing is, again, I would say it is the treatment of the symptoms rather than the source of the problem. And all investment goes into the upper ends of the population and do not go into the roots of the issue. Now, I want to describe a situation. Now, in Arab high schools, the average of people who finish with a full Bagrut are 40% of all Arab graduates of Arab high schools in Israel have a full Bagrut, a full matriculation that enables them to access higher education. However, only 12% of those 14 meet university criteria, and others do not meet university criteria. And if they want to study, they go to Palestinian universities or Jordanian or European or abroad anywhere. Now, when we look at these statistics, we see that there are 60% of all high school students are not really there in the right direction to graduate with the right matriculation exam. And as we know in Israel, it's only with a full Bagrut that you can go anywhere decent. And the question is, who is really looking at this population that statistically starts from the 8th grade to drop out, either visibly or invisibly? And we have statistics that the average of young male students around the 8th and 9th grade who drop are 3 times larger than the Jewish male students who drop around middle school. And this is exactly one of the places where there must be an investment. You cannot only wait to those who graduate and say, yeah, we have high-tech potentials or Technion potentials or Tel Aviv University potential. You cannot do that and think that you are really fixing a society. You need to go and look at where exactly the problem is occurring. And one of the places where the problem is occurring is at the movement in between middle school to high school. And this is where a big percentage, and it goes sometimes to 25% of young male students get lost in the transition. And this is where I think we can learn so much about why all the investment is not really helping. Now, there's another reason, if I may go on, or should I save it for another question?
I think if we can just allow Ms. Salaime to finish with her opening remarks, and then we can continue, if that's okay.
Actually, I will start my opening remarks because I...
Right.
Okay, so I agree with my colleagues on this few things. So I to change the discourse or the beliefs about few assumptions that Dalia and David did. For example, you know, the investment of the government in fighting the the crime in in the government resolutions specialize in this issue. We know, like Dalia said, that there are lots of money, a huge amount of money were invested in 922 resolution. We know that the research made by Sikkuy and Abraham Initiative and the government itself say that only 33% of the money allocated to that issue were used, so it's not about the budget, it's about using the budget. So the assumption that there's billions of dollars or shekels will invest in this issue and other issues is not quite true on the ground. After 5 years, I hope that the resolution 549, which is especially for fighting on companion crime and violence in the Arab society, will be much more sophisticated and detailed, and so we will have like higher chances to implement most of the programs that the government or the local authorities should take lead in that battle. So I hope that the current plan will be much more efficient, and we all hope that this is one of the chances that we have under this government. So this is one of the assumptions. The other thing that I think one of the major reasons about, and it might target the question that I heard before, in the last 20 years, the crime against women and in general increased in the Arab society, and we cannot ignore that it's we have this direct connection with the arm industry that Amal said, that it's never stopped in Israel. The Israeli army take place for the technology and the high tech and the traditional weapons, the guns and the M16 and all the Carlo, all kind of combinations that lead to simple guns. It's still in the stores, and I don't know if you hear, but the major deals between armed or soldiers in the army and the criminals, high-profile criminals in the Arab society, the coexistence there and shared society and the peace relationship there is blooming, and we are paying the price. So most of the weapons, and the police ignored that fact for many years, and now the government reports and the Knesset report says that 77% of the weapons ended up in the Arab society. The resource of that weapons from the Israeli army. So if I want to fight the flies or the mosquitoes, I will fight the place that they come from, okay, and not trying to eliminate them in the Arab society. I will shut up the shelter, the shelter says, or the resource of the weapon, and this is something that the Israeli army should do, and it's now on the ground, not under the ground. So I hope that the next step is really take responsibility for where the weapons come from, and it will help a lot. 90 or 85% of the crimes against the Arab society is not solved. So and also the 549 resolution says that the Israeli government should invest to build the trust between the Arab citizens and the police forces, and this is a huge issue, especially after what's happened in May and what's happened now in Sheikh Jarrah, what's happened in the Negev. So every encounter between the police officers and the civil society usually ended up in clashes of violence. So increasing the trust between the civil society, the civilians who call the police, trying to ask for help, and in the next day, the same police officers arrest minors in the Negev. We see it's kind of contradiction that we are not ready or are not able to absorb, to understand, to solve. And yet it's the responsibility of the police officers and the forces of the law that implement the law to gain our trust after 70 years of neglecting this issue. And I'm not talking about the testimonies that we heard from police major officers who testify in the Knesset that they have direct connection with the leaders of the crime leaders, and because they use their services in order to spy and to have resources of information against the Arab society. So this connection, only upgrade the suspicion and the mistrust between the civilians and the blue, we call it the blue police. We're not talking about the army, I'm not talking about the borders, I'm not talking about the Palestinian territories, we are talking about the civilian police, and it just have to disconnect itself from the militarism in the Israeli society, and this is a major issue. Dalia mentioned the economic aspect of poverty and easy money and what attract young youth and employment. And this is also, it can't be solved in 5-year plan. It's supposed to be holistic approach of several governments in order to target that 40% of unemployed and youth who do not work or study in any term. I think that what David said about the local and Dalia as well put lots of responsibility on the shoulders of local leadership. I agree that we have to take responsibility and do something, but I think that the current leadership, political one and the traditional one, is overrated by the government. Still, we read, I think it's stupid programs about empowering the traditional leadership in the Bedouin community in order to make peace or make, we call it sulha, or like mediation, all kind of traditional deals. It's not working anymore. So to overrate the local leadership and the political leadership that never, like in this last few months, we have never been in the government, and we have now special case, but we are not part of the governance. We are not part of the implementation of the law. So, going back to the traditional way to deal with very modern, sophisticated, severe phenomena, it's not gonna work, and it's waste of money and a lots of lives that we could save if we think differently. We are talking about, I believe in grassroots movement. I believe in civil society. I believe in share the programs and the approach of thinking. In each city, we know that Rahat is different from Nazareth. It's not the same thing in al-Fahim. So we can't design like a global or national model and say that this is what we have for you, do it, go and do it, and we will find you, and let's see what's happening. We have to think in the local level, and this is something that I believe that the leadership of the authorities is now taking lead, and I know about at least 7 mayors who were taking responsibility and design special programs and plans for their city, and not following the national level of the police. And maybe I will start, stop with that, and we'll take some questions. And so thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Salaime. I know that Mr. Tsur probably wants to respond to a few of the issues raised to do with the authorities and the police specifically. And if you can also focus on the issue of finding some sort of balance between on the one hand, the accusation that the police don't do enough, and on the other hand, that there's over-policing. So if you can help find us something to deal with that.
Okay, I will come to that, but I want to mention a few people said that if we have to deal with the problem, we have to not deal with the symptoms. We have to go deep in to the roots of the issues. So I don't agree with that, because I think in statistic, as you mentioned, maybe Dalia, that why the numbers are growing up. Statistic is not something which I think we should take it as the main issue to deal with as a benchmark or something like that. I can maybe try to explain why the statistic look like that, etc. Because maybe after the COVID year, so people are as Dalia said before, they drop from education, any kind of systems, which is when you're out of the system and you're on the street. So the easy money comes from going there to the crime. But I even doesn't want to go into the social issue and notice the guy who spoke before, Amal, who said it's not a security issue, it's a social issue. So maybe it's a good sentence to start with. First of all, it's both of them, because when something is heard now, and we have to deal with the symptoms, which means that the policing and the tactical things which should be done immediately in order to reduce the flames. And this is the responsibility of the police, period. This is the responsibility to fight against the organized crime, against the availability of the weapons. And you are right to say that some of those, the roots of the weapons which are coming from the stealing from the military and the other sources. Those are the symptoms, and this is the tactical on the immediate term which should be taken. But I want to say something which maybe it's not popular. The guns are, and I'm not a fan of the NRA, but this is something to remember. Guns are killing, but the one which is killing is behind the gun. So the fact that we will drop 90% of the guns in the Arab society, with all the respect, I don't think we will reduce it the same amount, the amount of crime. I'm not saying that this is not something to emphasize and to work on it. Of course, this is against the law, and we have to deal with that. But we have to deal with the criminals, not with the weapons. Okay, this is one issue. Second issue is, as I said, the organized crime and the gangs are fully responsibility of the police. And this should be done on the short term. There is a very good program, which I'm part of the advisory board there with the Deputy Minister of the Public Security, Yoav Segalovich, which he by himself was Major General, the head of the investigation in intelligence department in the police, and now is a Knesset member. And this program is actually going to deal with the symptoms on the short term and also on the deep in the roots of the things. And what are the roots? And I totally agree with Dalia, which I think she mentioned. Education is the main problem. Lack of education, the fact that you are on the, and you said over-policing and lack of policing. Okay, so this is, I think, the main dilemma on the Arab society. And there's another dilemma, which being socialized with the Jewish community or being isolated and going, and I can understand the complication, the fact of the identity, complicated identity. It's not something obvious, and which minorities are part of the society. They want to be part of the society, and I'm talking about the midterm and the long term. And I think there is a much than a willing, and it's not by parties. I must say, I was in the mid party, in the center with Tzipi Livni, and we definitely don't speak right and left. We speak the fact that we have more than 20% of the minority of the Israeli Arabs. We have like 15% almost of the Haredis, which have to be part of the Israeli society. And I'm more confident on the part of the Arab community on the economy in the Israeli society than the Haredis, which is a different role. We're not talking about, but if we're looking on the main issues that the government by sources, by putting efforts, have to change for the long term, is to try to invest on infrastructure, education, opportunities, all those things for the long term, which obviously have to be implemented, and not only by words or by throwing money, by planning, by especially with the Bedouins on the south, which have to be settled by a lot of programs which were brought into the government. I voted twice for Benny Begin and Praver program, which have to be executed, because more than 80, even close to 90% of the Bedouins are for it. Yes, there are some other claims which can't be 100% solved. So those are the long terms that we have to emphasize.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tsur. Amal, could you maybe talk a little bit about what kind of leadership, as the youngest representative of our panel, maybe what kind of leadership this generation is looking towards, if not in the Knesset, then maybe local or religious, in order to really overcome these issues?
The question about the leadership is very important, because we are seeing now that there is a new kind of young leadership in the Palestinian Arab society. This leadership are seeing the deep factors that affect their lives. They have the critical view for the policies of Israel. They are so proud of their Palestinian identity, and they want to make an impact without to lose their identity. This leadership are looking about the violence phenomenon as a political and a social phenomenon, and we cannot deal with it only with opening a police station or only with giving money for the Arab societies. We have to make a deep change in the policies of Israel and how they see the Arab society and the Arab youth leadership. I think that also the youth leadership understand now the importance of talking with the Jewish society, and how to impact the media, and how to be a good storyteller for your society, because in order to make a big social impact, the Arab minority can't do it alone. We have to have solidarity from the Jewish society in order to make a big impact, and that's explain why me and Samah and many others writers wrote every week to the Hebrew newspaper, and we go to interviews in order to make a change in the public sphere, and how people see this issue, because like I said, the media always blame the victim. Like in the last 7 years, they always blame the victim and they say that this is a mentality. It's a problem of the Arab mentality. And this is very dangerous, because if we are blaming the victim and all the time saying that it's their problem and they have to deal with it, there is no chance for any solidarity. And we can't suggest a effective solution for the problem.
Okay. Both Samah and Dalia, you've both been very active in work with women and empowering women and fighting against violence against women. And we've seen a lot of public awareness campaigns in the Jewish sector over the last few months with this issue. Has this resonated into the Arab community as well, or are these efforts sectorial entirely?
Well, maybe I'll take that, because I'm leading so many coalitions between feminist Jewish organization and Palestinian feminist organization. I think fighting violence against women is a case study as a success story of a shared work, shared struggle, because gender violence or gender-based violence is crossing nationality. And even though we know that this is a very special case in the Bedouin community, in the Ethiopian community, but still, there is differences between Jewish and Palestinian femicide cases, but still, this is a feminist issue. So we find for many years, it's like really, really hard work to build this partnership and trust between civil society, Jewish civil society, and Arab civil society organization. And we framed the HEDCO emergency, for example, panel with for the last 2 years in the Corona, leading the violence against women campaign in Arabic and in Hebrew, fighting in the Knesset, lobbying, advocacy. So we could find the way to work together. I think in also in the Hebrew or mainstream media and the Arab media. So that's why you're now hearing more about what's happening to women in Israel in general. And we could squeeze in to speak about 50% of the victims. They are Arabs. So if you really believe in feminism and sisterhood, so this is not Arab issue. It's not the Arab woman issue. It's the Israeli society issue. So it's feminist issue. If we are talking about sisterhood and feminism and solidarity and this whole, our goals or our values. So this is it. This is the struggle that we have to fight. And now we have the coalition against weapon, because and I do oppose what David said. It's about who's having the gun. Yes, it's about the man who holding the gun. I know, but if we have, if the number of the people who have accessibility and ability to own a cheap gun and increase 3 times in my society, it will put me in danger. This is what happened after what Erdogan did, giving the civilians access to a legal weapon in the Jewish society. It's influence and effect to the safety of women in the Jewish society. So it's also my issue as a feminist. So I think that if we got good, our struggle as civil society and activists and journalists leading or pushing the Israeli society to take responsibility of what's happening on the backyard of the Israeli society in the what's happening to 1.5 million Israeli Arab citizens who do agree, and most of them choose to be integrated, choose to be part of the Israeli economy, part of the Israeli academy, and part of what we saying that they're talking about 40% of the doctors and the health system. So it's like success story. We're now talking about the blossoms of the success story on the high tech. what about the civil issues? What about the safety? It's Israel state do not see my safety as a priority. You know, the Arab Life Matter, for example, this movement, it's you know, to do the polarization of what's happened to Afro-American, like the American system do not see their life as the same value. So what we are now trying to say, so we want equality in health issues, and the accessibility to the academic, the economy, and also the safety issue. It's never been on the table, and because we pay very painful price, you know, 120 victims this year. And this is like double from what happened the last decade. So it's yes, it's about the number of weapons in my society. It's not only about, and I don't like this hint that this is like something about the mentality or culture or their tradition. No, it's not. When violent men have a weapon to shoot me, they will do. If they have it in 100 shekel or 1,000 shekel, or they are forbidden to have access to that, my life will be, and I will feel more safe. So it's not about, you know, I do agree that it's, we have to fight the appearance of guns in whole the Israeli society, which I know it's very, you know, important issue. The, you know, the fan and the popularity of the army, of the Israeli army, it's not part of my world. But it's now it's the resource of my pain. So the Israeli society should take responsibility, and this will take us lots of appearance, Amal, myself, and other activists, to do these bridges, to understand what's happening, and we want you in that fight. We want you in that fight. And one of our tools, it's ironic, but in the May event, one of the things that the police say that, like, also the Arab society who fighting criminals, these criminals in Ramle and Lod, for example, after what's happened with the settlers, with the attacks against the Palestinians, the civilians, these people who were not legitimate, they were not popular, they were hidden, they appear in the neighborhoods trying to, you know, fight back and to be the heroes that fight the settlers. So what's happened to this woman, and this is a real testimony from a woman. She's a teacher, have 3 kids in Lod, and she said, I didn't know that my neighbor is so dangerous, and we have M16 and we have weapon in his home, so I don't know what, like, to say good morning to him or not. After what's happened, from the other one side, he protect us because the police didn't show up when the settlers came 3 times to hit us and to beat us up. And this man with his M16, he's now the hero who saved us. So this confusion of the values inside, and the power they gain, the fame that they gain because they, you know, did the good thing on this domestic intifada, I can say. So this confusion, this mess of values, it's not doing any well, like, for anyone. And yeah.
Thank you, Samah. We just have time just for 2 quick final questions, because we have promised to end shortly. The first is for you, David, specifically about the reports of a wave of police resignations towards the end of last year, with whistleblowers accusing the system of inflating statistics on success and essentially failing to fight crimes in some of these communities in the South. I'm not sure this is something you can comment on because you're no longer there, but I'm sure you're still familiar with the mechanisms. What can you tell us about perhaps their feelings? Are they justified?
Yeah. I will say a few words maybe before about the 2 speakers which said about double victimizing and putting the blame on the victims. I must say that the police, and I'm talking now high policy of politicians, etc., which I think also at the same level, but the police is not comfortable with the violence in the Arab society, and it's not it's not right to say that there is kind of calm with that, or negation, or any kind of ignoring the situation. This is one of the most, if not the high priority of the police today, and I think on the last 2 years, but definitely on the last year. And I think it's, and I spoke just today with the commissioner, with Kobi Shabtai, and we have a discussion all the time. This is something which is bothering him a lot. So, I mean, trying to say that it's not something that there is a policy for the violence, which is something positive for the Israeli society, definitely it's fake.
I didn't hear anyone who said that, but I think that this is a new thing that we all agree with, that this is something happened recently.
Trying to say
we agree about that. Like, we moved from the neglect, and and now we are talking about taking responsibility after many, many years. So we agree that this is the point that we are in.
Okay, great. And what I want to say, another thing about domestic violence, which was maybe one of the most frustrating subjects which I had to deal as a police commander in my districts, and talking about mentality, which is not politically correct to talk about, okay? Definitely, there is a problem which have to be dealt inside the society, the Arab society. It's not nice to say, I'm not again blaming the victims, but I'm saying it's a deep and very delicate and very important things which should be done. Maybe the tools, maybe the things have to be controlled by the government, but I'm talking about you as a feminist Arab leaders have to be aware that we, and I'm talking about, let's say, about the Bedouin community, and even in Jaffa, and even in Lud, and you know better than me about Lud, which I was the commander there at that time. We had at least 3 families, which 3 generations were assassinated. Not because any reason, it's not even, it's not anything which you can put the point and say, we could maybe, in one of the cases, unfortunately, we could even prevent it, and we didn't. But most of the cases, and I'm not talking about only the Israeli Arab communities, we have the same problem in different other communities, which is like a common on domestic violence against a woman, to use excessive violence and killing them. So this is a very, very important issue, I think, which we have to do it together. About your question, Dalia, look, I have a different numbers. Although I saw those TV programs with the police whistle. How do you call it before? Whistleblowers. And I think some of them even they dropped the mask later. And at least I know 2 of the officers who spoke. Some of the things which they're saying, we have to listen very carefully, because it's coming from a true frustrated, decent police officers who are doing the jobs. And it's not, it won't be wise just to drop the cases like saying, look, they're frustrated personally, or there is not a problem. Although the numbers are different from what maybe were published, but definitely there is a problem, although coming from a different angle, almost from the opposite angle, which they feel they don't have enough freedom to use an excessive force, or the force they need in order to deal with the violence, especially on the South. Hopefully, the leadership of the police can stop this phenomenon on time, and see that they have the enough tools, but also the education how to deal with those kind of delegate, how to use force against civilians. This is not something easy, and we now in the middle of this Pegasus scandal, etc. And this is a different use of force, which I think we need 2 hours of different session.
But we will
Right.
be happy if they use Pegasus against the criminals, right?
They doing, that's what they do.
Unfortunately, we don't have 2 hours, but I would like to give Dalia final remarks because we haven't heard from her in a while. And I'll just pass along a last question that we have from one of the journalists, which is whether we've seen any change in Israeli policy and government policy since Mansour Abbas joined it.
Of course, it's a blessed direction. Definitely, the fact that Mansour Abbas is in the government, in the coalition, for me, it's a momentum of change. It's definitely a change of paradigm. Everything that I have to say good about it, it's there. That some politicians would undermine that. I think they're undermining the fact that Arabs are and willing to be active participants and active in Israeli arena. And I see no reason why a community wants to stay on the margin of decision-making. Like it doesn't make any sense for me. What is it that we're criticizing? We're criticizing participation. We're criticizing active engagement. We're criticizing taking a place as major players on the ground of Israeli politics. Is this what we are criticizing? If this is what we are really criticizing, so what is the alternative? Being marginalized, being victimized, victimizing, internalizing victimhood, enclosure, inner destruction. What is it? Like, for me, sorry for the upsetting tone, but what is it actually that we want when we criticize such move on the side of Abbas? Now, I would finish with one thing, is that any solution to be targeted at the Arab community is definitely and has to be a joint venture of the government, of the Jewish side and the Arab side. In our country, no one side, and I mean both, majority and minority, no one side would escape the joint fate of living in one state. And that means whatever happens in the Arab community definitely explodes into the Israeli civic life. And we observed that happening in May. And on the other hand, whatever is happening on the Jewish or Israeli or governmental arena is definitely influencing what is happening there. So unless we really realize that the internal strength of the state of Israel depends on majorly, before anything external, on the relationship with the others and true investment in Arab in bridging the gaps. And unless we Arabs realize that we are here because we want to be here and we are bringing up our next generation to prosper and integrate and succeed in this country, nothing will happen. And again I say, because such formula is not well internalized on both sides, we will see more happening, unfortunately, on the negative outcomes of the lack of such equation.
All right, let's hope we don't get there. I want to thank everybody again, all of our panelists who joined. A video of this event will be available for latecomers and those unable to attend real time. And a special thank you to JPC's press coordinator, Eli Klotzstein, for putting together this very important event, and to JPC Director General Uri Dromi. May we have a healthy and quiet weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.